Hello everyone and welcome back. In this new section of the course, and before introducing any state management techniques in our application, let's talk about component communication. So far here in our application we had multiple components interact with each other via the Angular input syntax. So for example, the courses card list component, which is a purely presentational component, is receiving here the courses that it needs to display via an Angular input member variable. Now let's think about what would happen if we would have two Angular components at completely different levels of the Angular component tree that still need to interact with each other. Clearly, in that situation, we cannot use standard Angular inputs and outputs, because this mechanism is only useful when one component is present on the template of another component. So if the two components have a child-parent direct relationship. However, if that would not be the case, then how could two components interact with each other in a maintainable way if they were present at completely different levels of the component tree? You might be thinking that this situation is rather rare, but in fact it's going to be present in almost every Angular application that you build. Let's give a couple of examples of commonly needed components that you are for sure going to need in your own application. So the first example is the one of a loading indicator. So whenever we load the data from our application due to the delay on our backend, we want to show to the user some visual feedback with a loading indicator saying that the data is still getting loaded. And especially here in our save course operation, which takes a couple of seconds to execute in our backend, we want to be able to show here a loading indicator on top of this edit course dialog screen in order to give some feedback to the user that a save is ongoing. So the loading indicator will be present at a completely different level of the component tree than the home component or than the edit course dialog. We want to be able to make sure that the loading indicator, which is going to be a separate Angular component, and the different components that need to interact with it, such as the home component or the edit course dialog, are not tightly coupled to each other. We want to be able to make sure that the two components can interact in a maintainable way. In the next few lessons, we are going to learn how by adopting a reactive design, we are going to be able to have components interact with each other in a decoupled way, even though they are at very different levels of the component tree. So the first example that we're going to be providing is a loading indicator. Another very common example will be an error messages panel that is going to be displayed here and that will allow us to display errors that are triggered in many other places of the application, such as for example the home component whenever we are loading the courses, or the edit course dialog whenever we are trying to save our course in our backend and something goes wrong. We need somehow to show an error message to the user, and for that we are going to be using a messages panel that will also interact with the rest of the application using a reactive design. So let's now start with the first example, the loading indicator. In order to build our loading indicator, we already have here the skeleton of a loading component. Let's have a look at the initial version of our loading component. So as you can see, we simply have here an empty component. It's just the skeleton of the component. No logic was added yet. The HTML template is currently empty, and we also have here a little bit of CSS that we're going to need to implement our component. Based on this initial starting point, let's now discuss the design of the solution that we're about to adopt. Let's learn how using a reactive design is going to make it really simple for multiple parts of the application to interact with the loading component in a transparent way.